I've been asked more than once what was going through my head when I turned that key and stepped inside my own front door. Folks want to know if I shouted, if I put my fist through drywall, if 38 years of keeping my temper finally cracked. I didn't. I want to tell you exactly what I did instead, and by the time the sun came up the next morning, my daughter would understand that quiet men are the ones you should never underestimate. Some of you watching tonight, you already know what I mean. You've raised kids, you've built something with your own two hands, and you've learned the hard way that love without limits isn't love at all. It's just a door somebody keeps walking through to take what they want. Stay with me, because this one's for you. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 66 years old, and I've been married to my wife Diane for 34 years. We built a good life in a quiet town outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, just steady. I spent 31 of those years running a small fleet of delivery trucks, and Diane taught third grade until her knees gave out and she retired 4 years back. We raised one daughter, Bethany, 31 years old now. Smart girl, sharp tongue, could talk her way into or out of anything since she was 6 years old, sitting at my kitchen table doing multiplication tables faster than kids twice her age. 2.5 years ago, Bethany married a man named Corbin Vance. Now, I want to be fair here, because I try to be a fair man even when it costs me something. Corbin's not stupid. He's got a nice smile, a good job selling commercial insurance, and the kind of easy charm that gets a room laughing at his jokes. But his family, his father Randall Vance and his mother Denise, something about the two of them never sat right with me. The first time I shook Randall's hand at the engagement dinner, he gripped it a beat too long, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "So, Walter, tell me about your holdings." Not, "Tell me about yourself." Not, "Tell me about Bethany." My holdings. I laughed it off that night. Diane elbowed me under the table and told me to relax. It was just small talk. The man sells real estate. Of course he talks like that. I let it go. That was my mistake, and I own it. 12 days ago, I flew down to Charlotte for a logistics conference. Something I do maybe 3 or 4 times a year to keep our contracts fresh with the bigger shipping outfits. Diane knew. Bethany knew. Everybody in the family knew Walter was in Charlotte through Thursday. What nobody knew was that Wednesday afternoon, the whole thing got cut short, a scheduling conflict on the vendor side, nothing I could control. I had a choice. I could sit in a hotel room in North Carolina eating room service and watching golf reruns, or I could catch the 4 o'clock flight home and surprise my wife a day early. 34 years married, and I still liked surprising her. So sue me. I landed, grabbed my one bag, and drove myself the 40 minutes home. It was just after 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And here's where I need you to pay close attention, because every detail from this point forward matters. When I turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, I saw a car in my driveway that didn't belong there. Randall Vance's black Cadillac Escalade, parked at an angle like he'd pulled in fast and didn't much care how it looked. That old feeling came back up in my gut, the one I'd been ignoring for 2.5 years. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they'd stop by for lunch. Maybe Bethany invited them over. Families visit each other. I was tired from the flight and reading into things that weren't there. I parked at the curb, grabbed my bag, and walked up to my own front door. And the house was loud. Not loud like a celebration, loud in that strange, layered way. Like 2 completely different things were happening under one roof at the same time. From the direction of the kitchen, I heard laughter. Easy, relaxed, comfortable laughter. Ice clinking in glasses. Somebody telling a story that was clearly landing well. And from the den, just off the front hallway, silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. I pushed the front door open, and I saw my wife. Diane was on the floor of the den, her back against the base of her reading chair, legs out in front of her, one hand pressed against her chest, her breathing coming in short, shallow pulls. Her lips had gone a color I will remember until the day I die, a pale, grayish blue that no person's lips are supposed to be. Her eyes found mine the instant I walked through that door. And I need you to understand something. I have been married to this woman for 34 years. I have seen her cry at our daughter's wedding. I have seen her cry over a sick dog, over old photographs, over songs on the radio that remind her of her own mother. I have never, not once, in 3.5 decades, Seen her look at me the way she looked at me in that moment. Like she'd been holding on by her fingernails, waiting, and the second she saw my face, some part of her finally let go and said, "Okay, he's here now, I can stop fighting for just a second." That look is the thing that decided everything that came after it. I did not panic. I want that on the record. I am not a man who panics. I dropped my bag right there in the doorway, crossed that room in about 3 strides, got down on the floor next to her, and had 911 on the phone before my knees even hit the carpet. While the dispatcher walked me through, checking her pulse, while I was loosening the collar of her blouse and telling her to look at me, to stay with me, Diane, stay right here with me, I could still hear them, from the kitchen, laughing, my son-in-law and his mother and father, carrying on like they were at a backyard barbecue, while my wife lay on the floor 11 feet away from them, struggling to breathe. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. The paramedics made it in 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like 7 years. 2 of them came through that door fast and calm, the way people move when they've seen the real thing enough times to know exactly what to do with their hands. The lead paramedic, a woman maybe 40 years old with her hair pulled back tight, name tag said Ferris, had a stethoscope on Diane's chest within 20 seconds and looked up at me with an expression I will never forget. "Sir," she said, "your wife is in cardiac distress. Her heart rate is dangerously irregular. Has she had chest pain building up over the last few hours? Because this doesn't come on all at once. This builds." She said it plainly, professionally, no accusation in her voice at all. And I looked toward that kitchen where the laughter had finally stopped. I felt something in me go very still. Not hot anymore. Cold. I held Diane's hand while they got her onto the stretcher, and she squeezed my fingers twice. Our thing, since the year we got married. I squeezed back twice. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward that kitchen. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about me. I don't raise my voice. I didn't raise it on my kids when they were small, and God knows I've had reason to since. I am not a man who throws things or slams doors or makes a scene in his own home, but I am a man who handles things, and it was time to handle something. If you've stuck with me this far, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button. Costs you nothing, means a great deal to an old trucker like me who still isn't quite sure how any of this internet business works. I've walked into boardrooms with $100,000 riding on a handshake. I've walked into hospital rooms where I didn't know if the person on the other side of that door would still be breathing when I got there. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever felt like walking into my own kitchen that afternoon. The laughter had died the second I appeared in the doorway. The 3 of them were sitting around my kitchen table, Corbin at the head, Randall to his left, Denise to his right, surrounded by plates of food and half-empty glasses of sweet tea, like they'd just wrapped up a perfectly pleasant Wednesday lunch. In my house, while my wife turned gray on my den floor, I stood in that doorway a long moment, didn't say a word. I've learned over 66 years that the most dangerous thing a man can do when he's furious is slow down. Every instinct tells you to speed up, to get loud, to make the other person feel the size of what they've done. But slow is scarier. Slow tells the room you've already decided what happens next, and nothing they say is going to move you off it. So I stood there, slow, quiet, and I looked at my son-in-law. Corbin stood up first. I'll give him that much, he stood the moment he saw my face. Which tells me somewhere in that 34-year-old brain of his, some part of him already knew what was coming. You don't stand up like that unless you know. "Walter," he started. I held up one finger. "Just one." He stopped talking. I turned to Randall. Silver hair, deep tan, the kind of man who's never worked a job he didn't personally own. He had his hands folded on my kitchen table like he was chairing a board meeting in a house that wasn't his. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said, keeping my voice so level it probably scared him worse than shouting would have, "Get out of my house." Randall blinked. Denise set her tea down slowly. Corbin opened his mouth. "Dad, just let me." "I'm not talking to you yet," I said, still calm, still slow. "Get out of my house, both of you, now." Randall did the thing I knew he'd do. He tried to be the reasonable one. He leaned forward slightly, laced his fingers together, and said, "Walter, I think if we all just took a minute to breathe here, Randall. He stopped. I didn't ask for a minute. I didn't ask for a conversation. I asked you to leave my house, and I'm only saying it once more. Denise stood up fast, grabbed her purse, put a hand on Randall's arm, and gave him the look. Wives, give husbands. That means not here, not now. We're leaving. Randall rose slow, the way a man does when he wants you to believe he's leaving because he chose to, not because he was told to. As the two of them walked back through the front hallway toward the door, they passed the den, and they saw her. Diane on the stretcher now, oxygen mask across her face, an IV line taped into her arm, Ferris and her partner working with quiet efficiency around her. Denise stopped walking completely. Her hand went over her mouth. Randall's face drained of every ounce of color it had. Good. I needed them to see that. I needed that picture burned behind their eyes for the rest of their lives. They walked out without another word. The door clicked shut, and the house went quiet in a way that felt almost louder than the noise before it. Just me and Corbin left in that kitchen. He was still standing at the head of the table, hands hanging at his sides, jaw tight, and I noticed not for the first time that he had Bethany's mother's soft brown eyes. Right now, those eyes couldn't decide whether they wanted to look ashamed or defensive. I walked back into the kitchen slow, pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, folded my hands on the table, and looked at him. Sit down, Corbin. He sat. Talk, I said. And I want all of it. He let out a long breath, dragged a hand down over his face, and started talking. And here's where I need you to really lean in, because what came out of that boy's mouth over the next few minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about that afternoon. Corbin told me that his parents hadn't just stopped by on a whim. They'd been planning this visit for almost a month, waiting specifically for a window when I'd be out of town, and they'd shown up carrying actual paperwork, real, notarized paperwork related to a piece of property I own. A 12-unit apartment building on the east side of town that I've held for 22 years, that I've always told Bethany and Corbin would come to them one day, once I was good and ready to hand it over. Randall had apparently convinced himself that one day meant right now, and that with enough pressure on Corbin, they could get him to sign paperwork transferring managing control of that property while I was 300 miles away in Charlotte, without my knowledge, without my signature anywhere on it. I want you to sit with that for a second, same as I had to. These people walked into my home, sat at my table, and tried to talk my son-in-law into signing away something I spent 22 years building. While I was out of state and my wife was fighting for air in the next room, I kept my face still. Inside, an entirely different story. And Diane, I said quietly, where does she come into this? Corbin looked down at the table. She heard us, he said. She came into the kitchen maybe half an hour after they got here. She heard what my dad was proposing, and she wasn't having any of it, Walter. You know how she gets. 34 years, I know exactly how she gets. She told my dad flat out the building wasn't ours to sign over, that you hadn't agreed to any of it, that they were out of line even bringing paperwork into your house. My dad tried to talk over her, and she got loud right back at him, and it went back and forth a few minutes, and then she stopped talking, said her chest felt tight, said she needed to sit down. She went into the den, and I thought. He stopped. I was going to check on her. I swear I was. But then my dad started back up again, and I got pulled back into it, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in. He couldn't finish the sentence a third time. He didn't need to. I sat with everything he'd just told me for a long moment. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the paramedics' voices low in the den, could hear the wheels of the stretcher rolling across my hardwood floor toward the front door. So let me make sure I have this right, I said. My voice had changed, and even Corbin noticed it. I saw him straighten up slightly in his chair. Diane told your father, in her own home, that he was out of line. He talked over her. It escalated. She told you her chest felt tight, and you went back to the table. Corbin said nothing. You went back to the table, I said again. Not a question, just the fact of it, sitting on that table between us like something neither one of us could pick up and move. Walter, I didn't think it was that serious. She's had an irregular heartbeat for 4 years, I said. You've known that for 4 years. A paramedic who has never met your mother-in-law in her life understood in 20 seconds that this had been building for hours, and you sat back down at that table. I stopped myself because I felt it happening. That particular feeling you get when you've watched someone grow up, loved them, made room for them in your family, and you realize in one terrible moment that somewhere along the way, something in them never took root the way it should have. I stood up and said the last thing I planned on saying to him that day. I don't know what kind of man your father's been raising you to be for the last 2.5 years, Corbin, but he is not the man my daughter married. I walked out of that kitchen, back to my wife's side, took her hand, and I didn't speak another word to Corbin for the rest of the night. But understand something, that silence wasn't me letting it go. That silence was me thinking. And when Walter Higgins goes quiet, when he gets very, very still, that is exactly when you should start worrying. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 in the morning. Not the peaceful kind you get after a good dinner or a long laugh with people you love. The other kind, the kind with weight in it, the kind that makes the hum of the refrigerator sound too loud, makes the tick of the hallway clock sound like something counting down. That's the quiet I sat in that night. Diane was resting finally, home from the hospital after they'd stabilized her heart rhythm and run every test they had, cleared to recover at home under careful watch with medication and a follow-up scheduled for the morning. It had taken almost an hour of me sitting on the edge of our bed, holding her hand, dimming the lights just right, before her breathing settled and her face, that tired, worn, beautiful face, finally relaxed into something like sleep. I watched her for a long while, thought about 34 years, thought about the woman who married me back when I had more debt than sense, who rode along in the passenger seat of my very first truck because we couldn't afford 2 cars, who raised our daughter with more patience than I ever had, and more grace than most people ever get credit for. I thought about her on that floor, gray-lipped, holding on to consciousness by sheer stubbornness. And then I stopped thinking, and I started moving. I went down to my study, sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and got to work. Understand something about me before I walk you through what came next. I am not an impulsive man. I don't make decisions in the heat of anything, and I don't do things I have to walk back later. Every single thing I did that night, I had already decided sitting across from Corbin at that kitchen table, hands folded, face still. By the time I opened that laptop, I wasn't angry anymore. I was decided. There's a world of difference between those two things. First call I made was to the bank. 2:15 in the morning. When you've held an account long enough, and you're the primary holder, there's a number on the back of the card that never sleeps. I've used it exactly twice in 34 years. This made 3. Corbin had been an authorized user on my business credit line for 5 years. 5 years of fuel charges, dinners, a home theater system, a golf club membership. I never once asked him to justify. Removed. The representative on the line was brisk and professional, done in under 5 minutes. I moved to the next one. Boat insurance. Corbin had been using my 22-foot fishing boat down at the marina practically every weekend for 2 years. Listed as a covered driver on my policy. Dropped, effective immediately, before 3 in the morning. The apartment building. This one took longer, and it mattered more than any of the rest. 2 years ago, I'd put 20% down as a wedding gift on the house. Corbin and Bethany live in now a real gift. My name on the deed as a co-owner to protect the equity until the loan matured. I called my attorney, a man named Everett Marsh I've used for 18 years, left him a voicemail at 4 in the morning that I'd apologize for later, and told him I wanted the deed restructured. So, my equity share reverted entirely to Bethany's name alone, protected from any claim Corbin or his family could ever bring against it. I want it ironclad, I told the voicemail. I want it done this week. Every first of the month for 6 years, quietly, without conversation, I'd been wiring money into an account. Corbin and Bethany shared money that started as help getting their feet under them after the wedding and had, somewhere along the way, become an unspoken habit neither one of us ever discussed out loud. I logged in at 4:30 and canceled that transfer. Not paused, not reduced, canceled, permanently. I sat back in my chair a moment after that one, because that transfer represented something bigger than money. It represented a version of Corbin I had been quietly funding for years, a cushion, a safety net that maybe, possibly, had let him make exactly the kind of choices a man makes when he knows somebody will always be there underneath him if he falls. Not anymore. Then came the calls I won't apologize for. Over the years, I'd made introductions for Corbin clients for his insurance book, contacts in the business, favors that take decades to build because they live entirely in other people's trust in you. I spent some of that trust on my son-in-law, gladly. That morning, I started taking it back. I called 4 men I've known, 25, 30 years, told them plainly that Corbin would no longer be operating with my name behind him, and that any courtesy extended on my account should be considered finished. Every one of them asked if I was all right. Every one of them respected the call without pushing for the story. That's what 4 decades of keeping your word gets you. By 6 that morning, the streaming accounts were split, the shared phone plan I'd been covering was cut loose, and I had a locksmith scheduled at Bethany's request for 7:30 to change the locks on my apartment building where, it turned out, Randall had somehow gotten himself a spare key years back for emergencies. No more emergencies. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, watched the sky turn from black to gray to that pale blue that means morning's arriving whether you're ready or not. I thought about Randall Vance, sitting in his own house right now, probably not sleeping either, wondering what was coming next. He should wonder. Because the building he'd driven 300 miles worth of patience to steal a piece of, the one he'd planned for a month, the one he'd waited for my flight out of town to attempt. I'd already had Everett draw up paperwork that morning, locking Randall Vance permanently and completely out of any legal reach of anything I owned, present or future. Bethany showed up at the house around 9 that morning. I watched her from the upstairs window, walking up with her shoulders set the way she used to set them as a teenager, bracing for a hard conversation with her mother and me. She wasn't there for herself. She came straight to check on Diane, tears already on her face before she even got through the door, furious at Corbin in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. She sat with her mother a long while. Then she came and found me in the study. "Is it true," she said, "what Corbin's parents tried to do?" "It's true," I said. She was quiet a long moment, arms crossed, staring at nothing. "He let her lie there, Dad. He knew about her heart. He knew." "I know, sweetheart." She looked up at me, eyes red. "What did you do?" "What needed doing?" I said. "It has nothing to do with you. This is between me and the people who tried to take something from this family while your mother needed help and didn't get it." She nodded slowly, and something in her face told me she already understood more than she was saying out loud. Corbin called that afternoon. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Walter," he said, and his voice was different now. The defensiveness from the day before was gone. What was left underneath it sounded young, sounded like the kid who used to ask me nervous questions about trucks and engines back when he was still trying to earn my trust instead of just assuming he had it. "You let my wife lie on that floor, Corbin," I said. "You knew her condition. You knew what stress does to a heart like hers. And when she needed you, her own family, you chose to walk back to that table." He didn't answer. I could hear him breathing. "I love Bethany," I said. "I will always love her. And by extension, I've always tried to make room in this family for you. But love isn't the same thing as access, and every door I've kept open for you these past 2.5 years is closed now." Another silence, longer this time. "For how long?" he asked quietly. "Until you become the kind of man who doesn't need somebody else to answer that question for him," I said, and I hung up. I walked back to the bedroom. Diane was awake, sitting up against the pillows, morning light falling across her face, tired but present, herself again, my wife again. She looked at me a long moment. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. I sat beside her, took both her hands in mine, and looked at her the way you look at someone when you nearly lost them and you need one quiet second to just be grateful you didn't. "Everything," I said, "is handled." She studied my face, then slowly nodded and leaned her head against my shoulder. Somewhere across town, Randall Vance was finding out exactly how far his reach didn't extend anymore. Somewhere in his own kitchen, my son-in-law was sitting with a silence a whole lot louder than anything I could have shouted at him. Some folks listening to this will say I was too hard on the boy. Maybe I was. But I watched a paramedic, a total stranger, treat my wife's condition with more urgency in 20 seconds than the man who married my daughter showed in half an hour. And I decided, sitting in that kitchen with my hands folded, that the last real gift I had left to give Corbin wasn't keeping the doors open for him anymore. It was finally letting him feel, for the first time in his life, exactly what it costs when they close. He'll grow from it, or he won't. That part's up to him now. But Diane is alive. She is safe. She is home. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing that ever really mattered to me. If this one hit home for you the way it hit me telling it, do an old man a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell somebody in your family who'd understand exactly why I did what I did. I'll see you next time.